Hi, I'm Rob Furrow, a resident here in Davis, and right now we're in South Davis at the Willowbank Ditch, which is a really nice birding spot here in South Davis. We got here by driving to the intersection of Rosario Street and Almond Lane, which is in South Davis, accessed off of Montgomery Ave, um, probably best reached from Mace Boulevard. But you actually can park on almost any side and walk in, or if you're a resident in South Davis, you'll find there's walking paths to enter this area from any direction. So now we're going to head into the ditch. We're going to walk over from this intersection. We're going to cross a walking footpath to where the best habitat is, this long ditch with a lot of mature valley oaks. All right, so we just walked over the footpath, and now we're on the north side of the ditch. And from here, there's good habitat in almost any direction. You can turn left down a footpath, you can turn right and head east down a footpath, or you can go out along the paved path to a more open field. So at Willowbank Ditch, the key reason people come here is typically for spring and fall migration. There's lots of migrant songbirds that pass through this area in both spring and fall, particularly from about mid-April to mid-May in spring, and basically from mid-August throughout the month of September in fall. So migration is one key specialty of the Willowbank Ditch. The other is winter birds. So there's a few uncommon birds around the Davis area that can be found pretty regularly here at the ditch. Those include the red-breasted nuthatch, varied thrush, golden-crowned kinglet, and Pacific wren. So these birds that are typically thought of as mountain birds will sometimes spend the winter here around the ditch. A few things to cue in on when you come here in terms of where you look to find the birds are to focus on a few kinds of trees and a few kinds of shrubs. So the key tree that you'll find at the ditch, particularly near the footbridge, are valley oaks. Valley oaks are these big, majestic, gnarled branched oak trees that are deciduous. So they'll have no leaves in winter, but they'll have their leaves in spring and summer and fall. And they're the absolute best place for migrant warblers. So when you're looking for migrants, start by looking at the sunlit branches of the valley oaks. Just this morning, as I was walking around, there's been many dozens of yellow-rumped warblers with a few orange-crowned warblers mixed in, and that diversity is going to increase a lot as we get towards the end of April. So in addition to looking at valley oaks, take a look at some of the smaller shrubs around, many of which are particularly good for native birds. Often on the north side of these walking paths, you'll see these multi-stemmed shrubs that are growing to the size of small trees that kind of form a vase shape. And these are blue elderberry, which are a phenomenal plant for fruit that's highly desired by birds, and they attract a lot of insects as well. So they often are really nice places to find flycatchers, including Pacific slope and willow flycatcher. And at the base of these trees, you'll often find flocks of sparrows. You can also find these flocks of sparrows along the other side of the path towards the ditch, where you'll see many thickets of blackberry, often with some ivies and some wild cucumber growing up over them. And these are very good places for sparrow flocks, which can include some of the less common sparrows, like white-throated sparrow and fox sparrow in the wintertime. So my favorite way to bird the ditch, if we're starting from the footbridge, let's say you've just crossed over the footbridge and you're now on the north side of the ditch. I like to turn right and head east along the ditch. It doesn't take that long before you reach the end of the park here. However, there's a trail that heads out into the middle of this meadow and loops you back over to the paved path and the footbridge. And that's my favorite initial loop, in part because in the morning you'll have the sun coming from the northeast in springtime, which means if you take this loop, when you're in the meadow, you'll have the sun at your back illuminating the trees in front of you, and you'll have a really nice look through the tops of the valley oaks, down into the elderberry, and into some other nice plantings they have in the meadow, including buckeye and box elder. This is my favorite spot, just because you can see up into some valley oaks, and then there's all this diversity of beautiful nearby plantings like box elder, which is a kind of maple, and some buckeye, uh, valley oaks. There's a live oak to the left. Just a really nice, beautiful little meadow. So we just completed a loop heading east from the footbridge, and now we've returned back to the paved path with the footbridge to our south. What I typically like to do next is do a similar loop heading west along the ditch and then looping out into some of the meadows there. And there are multiple paths to reach out to be farther north, a little farther away from the trees, where it's easier to see up into the tops of the valley oaks because it can be a little difficult when you're standing right underneath them to see the warblers up at the top. So I typically like to loop along looking down low when I'm under the trees and then loop back farther out to look up into the tops of the oaks. So as you're walking along the ditch, keep an eye out for these small openings where there's a little more open space and kind of a little amphitheater of smaller shrubs on the north side. These can be really nice spots, both to look in the understory for sparrows and to look for flycatchers that are hanging out in the elderberries or the redbuds. So at this point, you'll see that you'll start to reach the end of the dirt path. Um, However, you'll note that there's a paved bike path that continues for quite a ways to the west. And actually, some of the best winter birds here are found further to the west. So if you continue that direction, there are fewer valley oaks, but there are more mature pines and a mix of other non-native species. And it tends to be a pretty good place for varied thrush, red-breasted nuthatch, and golden-crowned kinglet in the wintertime, as well as Pacific wrens. As you reach the first bench heading in that direction, you'll see some thickets and some um, dense understory where Pacific wrens have traditionally been found. I also wanted to call attention to some of the rare birds that have been found here at Willowbank Ditch. Last year, there was a barred owl. The first record for Yolo County was found here near the ditch and then later in some trees roosting right along the ditch. Since then, that owl was was found injured and taken into captivity and later passed away. But typically, a barred owl would not be reintroduced to the wild here because um, they are a non-native species that's been spreading into California and competing with the spotted owl. In addition, there was a really cool warbler found here last winter that stayed for quite a while. It was a worm-eating warbler. So a bird of the southeastern United States that spent the winter and into spring um, in various areas of this western part of the Willowbank Ditch Park. So kind of near where we're standing right now. So as we've headed west from the footbridge along the footpath, one natural turning point just before you reach the paved part of the bike path is to turn right at this wooden bench and where you see these flagstones laid down, and you can walk along a loop that goes around the middle of this meadow and takes you back towards the footbridge again. Oh, a nesting white-tailed kite. She's carrying some Looks like some grasses or something long and stringy behind her. Yeah, white-tailed kites really like they like to nest in the redwoods that are ornamentally planted around the town, um, but then come and forage and find nesting material over the more open areas.